whisper in the mountains. For 27 years, the killer walked free in Montana, living an ordinary life while a grieving family searched for answers. The truth about 15-year-old Danielle Houchen's murder lay hidden in 4 strands of hair, and a groundbreaking DNA test would finally unmask the monster who had been hiding in plain sight. It was a crisp September morning in 1996 when 15-year-old Danielle Houchen decided to take a walk along the trail near the river in Belgrade, Montana. The town was alive with the energy of its annual festival, the streets filled with music, laughter, and the warmth of neighbors coming together. Danielle, known for her adventurous spirit, promised her mother she'd be back by 2 p.m. With her mom's wristwatch on her arm and a bottle of water in hand, she left the vibrant festival behind and set off into the quiet serenity of nature. By 2:30, Danielle had not returned. Her mother, initially brushing off her absence as youthful forgetfulness, grew uneasy as the minutes stretched into hours. The trail was a familiar path for Danielle, a place she had walked countless times without trouble. Unable to shake her growing dread, her mother asked a friend to join her in searching for her daughter. They drove to the trailhead, where a chilling sight awaited them. Danielle's white pickup truck sat idling, its doors wide open. Scattered nearby were her keys and water bottle, lying carelessly on the ground. Danielle was meticulous by nature. The scene was wildly out of character. A cold wave of fear swept over her mother as the familiar woods, once a haven of adventure and joy, suddenly felt hostile and ominous. The search began immediately. Friends, family, and neighbors rallied to comb the woods and riverbank, their voices calling Danielle's name into the oppressive silence. The forest, usually brimming with life, seemed to swallow their cries whole. Hours passed, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, hope began to waver. It wasn't until the pale moonlight illuminated the path that a family friend, flashlight in hand, made a horrifying discovery. Near the riverbank, in shallow water, lay Danielle's lifeless body. Her vibrant presence, which had filled the lives of those around her, was now a haunting stillness. The shock of the discovery rippled through the community, leaving them grappling with an unbearable grief. The local sheriff quickly ruled the death an accident. Without visible wounds or signs of a struggle, he concluded that Danielle must have slipped and drowned in the shallow water. But her family refused to accept this explanation. Danielle was no stranger to the trail. It was practically her second home. How could someone so skilled and familiar with the terrain meet such an end? And why had her belongings been scattered so haphazardly? The community, too, began to question the sheriff's hasty conclusion. Whispers spread across Belgrade, voices full of unease. Could it really have been an accident, or was there something far darker at play? Theories began to swirl in hushed conversations. Could someone have been waiting for Danielle? Could she have been followed? What began as a search for clarity transformed into a deepening mystery, one that fractured the trust between the people of Belgrade and the authorities meant to protect them. Danielle's family, torn apart by heartbreak, began quietly demanding answers. They refused to let her death be reduced to an accident, convinced that something far more sinister had happened on that trail. Standing where her journey had ended, they were left with one haunting question. Was Danielle the victim of a tragic accident, or was someone responsible for stealing her future? That question, unanswered, would torment the town for decades to come. The shadows beneath the surface. Danielle's family, devastated by her loss, could not reconcile the sheriff's conclusion with the reality of what they knew about her. She had practically grown up on that trail, traversing its paths with confidence and ease. The water where she was found was shallow, far too shallow to drown a careful, experienced hiker like Danielle. Something about the situation felt wrong, deeply wrong. Days later, the autopsy report confirmed their fears and shattered any lingering illusions that her death was accidental. The findings sent shockwaves through the town. Danielle hadn't simply drowned, she had been brutally attacked. Her body bore scratches and bruises, clear evidence of a violent struggle. These weren't marks of a slip or fall, but defensive wounds, proof that Danielle had fought back with all her strength. But the most horrifying revelation was still to come. Danielle had been sexually assaulted. The cruel reality of her final moments was a devastating blow to her family and left the entire community reeling. Someone had overpowered Danielle, dragged her to the river, and held her under the water until her life slipped away. The watch she wore, found pushed up near her elbow, told a chilling story. A grim reminder of how violently she had been restrained. The sheer brutality of the crime painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. Yet, despite this damning evidence, the sheriff hesitated. He listed Danielle's cause of death as undetermined, a decision that left the case in limbo. This lack of action infuriated Danielle's family, who were desperate for justice. Why wasn't a homicide investigation launched immediately? How could such obvious signs of violence be dismissed? The sheriff's reluctance only deepened the mystery and cast a shadow over the town. Suspicion spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had once greeted each other warmly now exchanged wary glances. The sense of safety that had defined Belgrade began to crumble. For the first time, residents grappled with the horrifying idea that a predator might be hiding among them, walking the same streets and blending seamlessly into their close-knit community. For Danielle's family, particularly her younger sister, the pain was unrelenting. Each new revelation added to their grief, fueling their determination to uncover the truth. They couldn't escape the gnawing question that consumed their every thought. Who could commit such a monstrous act? How could someone so vile remain hidden in plain sight? Amid this growing tension, a lead emerged, a small but significant clue. Investigators found 4 hairs on Danielle's underwear, none of which belonged to her. The hairs, identified as male, offered a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark and stagnant investigation. A partial DNA profile was extracted from the hairs, but it wasn't enough to identify the perpetrator. The lead felt like a cruel taunt, a thread that dangled just out of reach, refusing to unravel. The family clung to this shred of evidence, holding on to the hope that someday, somehow, it would lead to justice. Meanwhile, the rest of the town grappled with the chilling possibility that Danielle's killer could be someone they passed by every day, someone they trusted. The unanswered questions and unresolved pain continued to haunt the community, as the darkness surrounding Danielle's death grew heavier with each passing year. The case, mired in grief and unanswered questions, reached an unbearable standstill. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still, no progress was made. The sheriff remained reluctant to reclassify Danielle's death as a homicide, dismissing calls for a deeper investigation. For her family, it felt like a betrayal. The evidence was clear. This was no accident, but their cries for justice were met with silence. The killer, unseen and untouched, seemed to slip further into the shadows with every passing day. Suspicion began to ripple through Belgrade like a cold wind. Neighbors who had once shared warm greetings now eyed each other with unease. Whispers of guilt passed behind closed doors, targeting anyone who seemed even slightly out of place. The once peaceful town, so rooted in trust, became a fractured community, its sense of security irreparably shaken. Still, the killer remained a phantom, ever present but untouchable. For Danielle's younger sister, the tragedy became a defining force in her life. Too young at the time to fully understand the depth of the loss, she grew into the role of her family's voice. As the years passed, she fought relentlessly to keep Danielle's story alive. She wrote letters to law enforcement, pleaded with the media, and refused to let her sister's name fade into obscurity. It was her mission, her burden, and her unshakable promise. Danielle would have justice, no matter how long it took. By 2019, 23 years after Danielle's murder, advances in DNA technology offered a glimmer of hope. Techniques that had once seemed like science fiction were now helping to solve even the coldest of cases. With renewed determination, Danielle's family pushed to have her case reopened. Their persistence paid off. The sheriff's office finally reclassified her death as a homicide, acknowledging what her family had known all along. This was no accident. It was a brutal crime. Investigators revisited the evidence with fresh eyes, poring over every detail of the case. The partial DNA profile found on Danielle's body, once a frustratingly incomplete clue, was sent to a cutting-edge forensic lab. This time, technology delivered a breakthrough. A full DNA profile was extracted. It was a monumental step forward, but the killer's identity still eluded them. The national database yielded no matches, leaving the shadow of doubt hanging over Belgrade. In 2023, a new sheriff took charge, a man who had long been haunted by the failures of the original investigation. Determined to right the wrongs of the past, he enlisted outside help. A retired investigator and a DNA specialist were brought on board, their expertise reigniting the search for answers. Together, they turned to genetic genealogy, a revolutionary tool that had solved countless cold cases by tracing DNA through family trees. The breakthrough came almost immediately. The extracted DNA profile was uploaded to a public database, one where individuals voluntarily submitted their genetic information. Within moments, they found a match, a perfect, undeniable match. The name was Paul Hutchinson. Hutchinson was a respected family man, living in a quiet town miles away. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, but in 1996, he had been a 27-year-old biology student living just a short drive from Belgrade. The revelation was staggering. How could someone who had lived an ordinary, unassuming life harbor such a horrific secret? The killer, who had haunted Danielle's family for decades, had been hiding in plain sight. For Danielle's family, the discovery was both a triumph and a new kind of anguish. The man responsible for their daughter's death had lived a peaceful, uninterrupted life for nearly 30 years. While they had endured the unrelenting pain of loss and unanswered questions, he had built a life, a career, a family. The weight of that injustice was almost too much to bear. But as the name Paul Hutchinson came to light, a darker question loomed. Would he finally face the justice he deserved, or would the truth come too late? Paul Hutchinson, a name that had never once surfaced in the investigation, was finally unmasked. For nearly 3 decades he had lived undetected, carrying the secret of Danielle's murder while building a seemingly ordinary life. In 1996, Hutchinson was a 27-year-old biology student at the University of Montana, just 12 miles from Belgrade. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no rumors of wrongdoing. To those who knew him, he was unremarkable. Yet now, with the help of cutting-edge forensic science, the facade of an ordinary man crumbled, revealing the darkness he had hidden for so long. In July 2024, investigators moved swiftly to confront Hutchinson. On a warm morning, they arrived at his workplace. Hutchinson was outside, chatting and laughing with co-workers, his demeanor relaxed and carefree. But the moment he saw the officers approach, his face drained of color. His shoulders stiffened and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. When they asked him to accompany them to the station for questioning, he agreed. But his steps were heavy, as if everyone brought him closer to the truth he had worked so hard to bury. At the station, detectives began with routine questions about local cold cases. Hutchinson's responses were measured and polite, his voice steady. He appeared calm, almost detached, as if he believed he could talk his way through the interrogation. But when they slid a photograph of Danielle across the table, everything changed. His hands trembled, his breathing grew erratic, and his eyes darted around the room like those of a cornered animal. He scratched at his face, his lips quivered, and sweat trickled down his temple. The carefully constructed facade he had maintained for years was unraveling, exposing the guilt he could no longer contain. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Hutchinson denied any involvement. His voice wavered, trembling with fear, but he clung to his denial. The detectives, unconvinced, allowed him to leave after collecting a fresh DNA sample. They knew it was only a matter of time before the results confirmed what they already suspected. Paul Hutchinson was the man who had stolen Danielle's life. The next morning, before the DNA results could arrive, Hutchinson made a chilling phone call to the local police station. His voice was eerily flat, devoid of emotion. He gave them an address, saying only that he needed help, then abruptly hung up. When officers arrived at the location, they found his car parked on the side of a remote road. Inside, Hutchinson sat slumped in the driver's seat, a gun resting in his lap. He had ended his own life, taking his secrets to the grave. For Danielle's family, the news of Hutchinson's death brought a storm of conflicting emotions. Relief swept over them. After decades of anguish, they finally had a name, a face to the monster who had haunted them. But that relief was tainted by frustration and anger. Hutchinson had escaped accountability. He would never stand trial, never face the weight of his crimes, never have to answer for the torment he had caused. The chance to confront him, to demand the truth, was gone forever. As the investigation closed, new questions emerged, leaving Danielle's family and the community grappling with the unknown. Why had Hutchinson done it? What drove a seemingly ordinary man to commit such a heinous act? Was Danielle the only victim, or had there been others? The lack of answers only deepened the family's grief, casting a shadow over their long-awaited resolution. Hutchinson's death left an incomplete ending to a story filled with unimaginable pain. Danielle's family would never hear his reasons, never understand the darkness that had consumed him. What remained was a chilling truth. Monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they walk among us, blending into the fabric of ordinary life, waiting for the moment to reveal their true nature. For Danielle's family, the pain of her loss was a wound that would never heal. The questions remained unanswered, the grief an unrelenting companion. But her memory endured, driving them to ensure that her story would not be forgotten. Justice, even delayed, had finally come. Yet, as they stood at the trail where her life had been stolen, they couldn't shake the haunting question, why? Paul Hutchinson's death marked the bitter end of a journey that should have brought resolution for Danielle's family. While his guilt was undeniable, his decision to end his life robbed them of the opportunity to confront him, to demand answers for the nightmare he had inflicted upon their daughter and sister. Justice, in some form, had been served, but the closure they had sought for nearly 3 decades remained just out of reach. For Danielle's family, the news of Hutchinson's death brought a storm of emotions. Relief came first. They finally had a name, a face to the man who had haunted their lives for so long. But that relief was quickly overshadowed by frustration and anger. Hutchinson had taken the easy way out, avoiding the consequences of his actions. There would be no trial, no accountability. The chance to see him held responsible, to hear his reasons, had been stolen from them, just as Danielle's life had been stolen nearly 30 years earlier. The town of Belgrade, once a close-knit and trusting community, found itself forever changed. Danielle's murder and the revelation of Hutchinson's guilt left an indelible scar on the town's collective memory. Parents clung more tightly to their children, their trust in the safety of their surroundings irreparably shattered. For those who had known Hutchinson, the truth was almost incomprehensible. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster who had taken Danielle's life. His wife, blindsided by the revelation, issued a tearful statement expressing her sorrow for Danielle's family. "The man I knew was not the man who did this," she said, her voice trembling. "But that doesn't change what he did." Determined to ensure that Danielle's story would not fade into obscurity, her family became fierce advocates for justice reform. They spoke openly about the failures of the original investigation, emphasizing the importance of urgency and thoroughness in all cases of missing persons. They championed the use of advanced DNA technologies, particularly genetic genealogy, as tools to bring closure to cold cases. Their tireless efforts turned Danielle's story into a symbol of hope for other families still waiting for answers. In August 2024, a memorial service was held in Danielle's honor. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers gathered to celebrate the life that had been so cruelly cut short. Danielle's sister, who had fought relentlessly to keep her memory alive, stood before the crowd. With tears in her eyes, she addressed them. Danielle was robbed of her future, but her story will save others. We won't let this happen again. Her words carried the weight of years of pain, but also a renewed resolve to turn tragedy into change. Yet even as Danielle's family and the town tried to heal, one haunting question lingered. Why? What had driven Paul Hutchinson to commit such a monstrous act? Was it a moment of impulse, or had he harbored darkness for years? Was Danielle his only victim, or had others fallen prey to his violence? The lack of answers was a cruel twist, leaving an ache that time could not ease. The trail where Danielle had taken her final steps, once a place of freedom and joy, now stood as a stark reminder of how quickly life could turn into a nightmare. For her family, the pain of her loss would never fade, and the questions would never be fully answered. But they carried her memory forward, determined to ensure that her story would inspire change and that justice, no matter how delayed, would prevail. Danielle's story did not end with Hutchinson's death. It continued in the push for reform, in the renewed commitment to uncover the truth for other victims, and in the memories of those who knew and loved her. As they stood at the trail where her life had been taken, her family knew one thing for certain. Monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they walk among us, hidden behind ordinary lives, waiting for the moment to show their true faces. If Danielle's story moved you, let her legacy inspire action. Share this video to raise awareness about the importance of justice and reform in unsolved cases. Leave your thoughts in the comments and help keep her memory alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories that deserve to be heard. Together, we can ensure no voice is left unheard. A quiet town, a chilling mystery. A routine AC repair call turned deadly when Michael Harding walked into an empty house, unaware his wife orchestrated his murder. On the peaceful afternoon of September 19, 2022, Burkesville, Kentucky became the unlikely stage for a chilling tragedy. Michael Harding, a 53-year-old known for his kindness and skill as an air conditioning repairman, set off on what seemed like an ordinary job. He was headed to inspect a unit at a vacant house, a task he had done countless times. But this time was different. As he stepped into the still empty property, a sense of foreboding seemed to hang in the air, though Michael remained unaware of the danger awaiting him. Days later, his lifeless body was found by a real estate agent and potential buyers drawn to the scene by a terrible odor. Michael had been shot multiple times and left sprawled on the floor. Blood stained the wooden boards, silent witnesses to the horror that had unfolded. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community. Who would harbor such hatred for a man known for his warmth and generosity? Why lure him to an isolated house for such a cold, calculated act? Investigators quickly determined it wasn't random. Michael had been set up. The meeting was a deliberate trap. But by whom and why? The town's quiet charm was shattered as detectives peeled back the layers of his life, uncovering tensions in his marriage to Julie Harding, a decorated California Highway Patrol captain. Their pending divorce and strained relationship soon drew Julie into the spotlight of suspicion. But even as Julie's name surfaced, the case proved far more tangled than anyone could have imagined. Shadows of a larger conspiracy began to emerge. A hired hand, meticulous planning, and motives buried deep beneath the surface. How had Michael, a man simply doing his job, become the target of such malice? Who could orchestrate such a merciless act? These questions hung heavy as the investigation unraveled, leaving the quiet town of Burkesville forever changed. Michael Harding was the kind of man who fit easily into any community. In Salina, Tennessee, where he had recently settled, he quickly earned a reputation as a dependable and skilled air conditioning repairman. Neighbors spoke warmly of his generosity, offering help without asking for anything in return. Fishing by the lake and chatting with locals became part of his routine, a peaceful rhythm he hoped would define his retirement. But Michael's life wasn't without its complexities. He had been married to Julie Harding, a respected California Highway Patrol captain known for her dedication and leadership. Julie was admired in her community, but her demanding career often required sacrifices. Over time, the distance between them became more than geographical. Michael embraced a slower pace of life in Tennessee, while Julie remained committed to her work in California. The emotional gap between them widened. In 2019, the couple sold their California properties and bought a picturesque lakeside home in Salina, envisioning it as a fresh start. Yet, the idyllic setting couldn't repair their relationship. By 2022, they were living separate lives. Their marriage fractured beyond repair. Divorce proceedings had begun, though both seemed reluctant to fully sever ties. Michael adjusted quickly, even starting a new relationship, while Julie focused on her career and community work. Friends whispered about unresolved tensions, particularly over financial matters and their shared dog, Charlie. The cracks in their seemingly amicable split were subtle but significant. What appeared as a calm separation on the surface concealed deeper currents of resentment and frustration. For Julie, the strain was compounded by the image she maintained as a respected public servant. For Michael, his move to Tennessee meant to bring peace, instead became the backdrop for betrayal and, ultimately, violence. As investigators later discovered, the separation wasn't just emotionally charged, it became the foundation for something far darker. Michael's life ended not in peace, but in brutality. What began as a quiet attempt at rebuilding spiraled into chaos, pulling both Michael and Julie into a web of conflict, suspicion, and tragedy. When Michael's body was discovered, it was clear his death wasn't random. Someone had planned it, a calculated act fueled by motives buried in the complexities of their lives. Peace for Michael would remain as elusive as the answers to the questions his death left behind. September 19, 2022, started like any other day for Michael Harding. A trusted and skilled air conditioning repairman, he received a request to inspect a unit at a vacant house in Burkesville, Kentucky. Known for his willingness to help, Michael accepted without hesitation. It seemed like a routine job, but it would be his last. The house, listed for sale on the outskirts of town, appeared ordinary. Its electronic lock, installed to simplify real estate showings, was unwittingly exploited by someone with sinister intentions. A call had been made to the listing agent, posing as a potential buyer's representative to obtain access. It was a simple ruse, and no one suspected anything amiss. Michael arrived in the afternoon, tools in hand, unaware of the danger waiting inside. He was a man used to solving problems, not anticipating one of his own. Inside the quiet, empty house, someone had set a deadly trap, exploiting his trust and routine to perfection. The attack, investigators later revealed, was ruthless. Michael was ambushed, shot multiple times at close range. Blood splattered across the walls, a grim testament to the brutality of the crime. Whoever had orchestrated this had no intention of leaving him alive. Days passed before his decomposing body was found by a real estate agent and potential buyers. The grisly discovery sent shockwaves through the community and turned a sleepy town into the scene of a horrifying mystery. Questions immediately arose. Who would do this to Michael, a man known for his kindness and generosity? Why lure him to such an isolated location? The meticulous nature of the murder made it clear this was no crime of passion. It was calculated, deliberate, and cold. Investigators began unraveling Michael's life, examining his relationships, finances, and daily habits. One name surfaced repeatedly: Julie Harding, his estranged wife, a respected California Highway Patrol captain. Julie was miles away at the time, expressing shock and devastation over the news. But as evidence began to emerge, cracks appeared in her facade of mourning. Hidden beneath the surface was a web of secrets, lies, and betrayal. This was not just a murder investigation. It was the beginning of a chilling conspiracy that would stretch across 3 states, leaving behind a trail of destruction that no one could have anticipated. The investigation into Michael Harding's murder was anything but straightforward. From the start, it was clear someone had gone to great lengths to ensure his death. The crime scene yielded little: no witnesses, no fingerprints, and no direct ties to the vacant house where his body was found. Yet, as detectives delved into Michael's final days, they began uncovering a trail of subtle but damning clues. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Michael's phone records. Among his usual calls and messages was an unfamiliar number, unregistered and seemingly untraceable. This burner phone turned out to be the key to unlocking the case. It had been used to contact Michael and lure him to the house where he was ambushed. But who owned it? The answer came with a chilling name: Thomas O'Donnell, a 60-year-old man with a troubled past. Known for violent behavior and with restraining orders filed by an ex-girlfriend, O'Donnell wasn't on anyone's radar until investigators matched the burner phone's movements to his. Jeep's data revealed the phone had been activated weeks before Michael's murder and tracked across state lines, from California to Tennessee to Kentucky. At every step, its movements aligned with O'Donnell's known whereabouts. But why would O'Donnell target Michael? That question led detectives to Julie Harding, Michael's estranged wife. Phone records showed nearly 200 calls between Julie and the burner phone between July and September 2022. While the contents of these calls couldn't be retrieved, their frequency raised serious suspicions. Was Julie involved in planning her husband's murder? Adding to the intrigue were Julie's unexplained financial transactions. In the months leading up to Michael's death, she had withdrawn over $222,000 from her bank accounts, an unusual move for someone with no apparent reason to need such large sums. Investigators suspected the money could have been used to pay O'Donnell for carrying out the crime. The connections between Julie and O'Donnell grew harder to ignore. Surveillance footage showed O'Donnell's vehicle near Julie's residence multiple times, and his presence in her neighborhood just weeks before the murder suggested a relationship neither had disclosed. The evidence painted a picture of calculated planning and collaboration. Investigators also uncovered how O'Donnell gained access to the vacant house. By posing as a real estate agent and claiming to represent interested buyers, he obtained the electronic lock code to the property. This small but significant detail highlighted the extent of his preparation and the deliberate nature of the crime. On December 8, 2022, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Authorities arrested Thomas O'Donnell at Sacramento International Airport, charging him with Michael's murder. Hours later, Julie Harding was arrested on unrelated charges of stalking and trespassing. Though her charges initially seemed minor, the timing of the arrests suggested otherwise. Investigators were closing in on the connection between the two. The arrests sent shockwaves through the communities that had admired Julie as a respected law enforcement officer. How had a woman with such a sterling reputation become entangled in a murder plot? And what role had she truly played in Michael's death? These questions loomed large as the investigation pressed forward, uncovering more about the tangled web of relationships, deceit, and betrayal that led to Michael's tragic end. When news of Julie Harding's arrest broke on December 8, 2022, it stunned her friends, colleagues, and community. As a respected captain in the California Highway Patrol, Julie had earned admiration for her dedication and leadership. Her arrest on charges of stalking and trespassing seemed almost unthinkable, but the implications of her connection to her estranged husband's murder made it even more shocking. The charges stemmed from an incident weeks earlier involving Michael Harding's new girlfriend and their dog, Charlie. After Michael's death, the girlfriend had taken custody of Charlie, but Julie, emotionally attached to the dog, wanted him back. On October 10, 2022, security footage captured Julie entering the girlfriend's home uninvited and taking Charlie. Despite her previous request to resolve the matter at a police station, Julie acted on her own terms, prompting a trespassing complaint. Days later, the girlfriend reported feeling stalked, escalating an already tense situation. At first, Julie's actions appeared personal and unrelated to Michael's murder, but for investigators, they were another piece of a troubling puzzle. Combined with her significant financial withdrawals, frequent communications with Thomas O'Donnell, and mounting circumstantial evidence, Julie's arrest painted a picture of a woman whose life was unraveling under pressure. Julie's time in custody was brief. She was released on bail soon after her arrest. Tragically, just 2 days later, on December 10th, a postal worker discovered her body in the garage of her Tennessee residence. The scene was grim. A single gunshot wound and a handwritten note that read, "Michael, I guess you still win." The cryptic message offered little clarity but hinted at deep emotional turmoil. Authorities quickly suggested suicide as the cause, citing no signs of foul play. The media echoed this conclusion, though some questioned whether Julie's death might conceal darker truths. Investigators began combing through her life, trying to understand what could have driven her to such a breaking point. Julie's death added another layer of complexity to an already convoluted case. With her gone, many of the case's questions were left unanswered. Had she orchestrated her estranged husband's murder, recruiting O'Donnell as her accomplice? Or was she merely a pawn in a scheme she couldn't control? And what had pushed her so far? As friends and family struggled with these questions, investigators continued to examine her connection to O'Donnell. Phone records, financial transactions, and cards signed with O'Donnell's nickname, Rab, pointed to a deeper relationship between the two. Evidence suggested that their connection went beyond casual acquaintance, raising more questions about the extent of their collaboration. Julie Harding's fall from grace was as swift as it was tragic. A woman, once celebrated for her integrity and leadership, now stood accused, even in death, of plotting her husband's brutal murder. But with her death, the case lost a key figure, forcing investigators to rely solely on evidence to uncover the truth. Attention now turned to Thomas O'Donnell. With his arrest and the evidence mounting against him, the case seemed closer to resolution. Yet questions about motive, collaboration, and the dynamics of Julie and Michael's relationship lingered, leaving behind a trail of mystery and unease that investigators were determined to unravel. The case against Thomas O'Donnell. With Julie Harding gone, the task of unraveling Michael Harding's murder rested squarely on investigators. The evidence against Thomas O'Donnell, the alleged hitman, was substantial but circumstantial. Every clue had to be meticulously pieced together to form a narrative strong enough to stand up in court. The burner phone became the centerpiece of the investigation. Activated on August 29, 2022, it was used extensively in the weeks leading to Michael's death. FBI analysts traced its signal to multiple locations, including Julie Harding's home in California and the vacant house in Burkesville, Kentucky, where Michael was killed. On the day of the crime, September 19th, the phone's movements matched O'Donnell's, placing him in Burkesville at the critical time. The crime's precision left no doubt about its premeditation. Investigators discovered O'Donnell had gained access to the vacant house by pretending to be a real estate agent. A single phone call to the listing company had secured the electronic lock code, giving him free access to set the ambush. This revelation highlighted not only O'Donnell's cunning, but the calculated planning behind the murder. Financial records provided another damning piece of evidence. Julie Harding had made suspicious withdrawals exceeding $222,000 in the months before the murder. Although there was no direct paper trail linking the money to O'Donnell, the timing and amounts were too conspicuous to dismiss. Investigators theorized the funds were used to pay O'Donnell for the job. Surveillance footage proved pivotal. Cameras in Burkesville captured O'Donnell's Toyota Tundra passing through town just hours before Michael's body was found. Additional footage from nearby states corroborated his movements, weaving a timeline that connected him undeniably to the crime scene. The evidence painted O'Donnell as a man hired to carry out a cold-blooded murder. Yet the question of motive loomed large. Was he simply in it for financial gain? Or did his connection with Julie Harding run deeper than investigators realized? On December 15, 2022, a grand jury in Cumberland County, Kentucky, indicted O'Donnell on first-degree murder charges. Prosecutors announced their intent to seek the death penalty, citing the murder's premeditation and financial motive. O'Donnell, however, denied any involvement, refusing to cooperate or shed light on his relationship with Julie. As the trial approached, the unanswered questions surrounding Julie Harding's role lingered. Was she the mastermind, orchestrating the murder to escape a failing marriage? Or was she a pawn caught in a deadly scheme? Her sudden death left investigators without a key witness, forcing them to rely entirely on the evidence. The trial promised to be a spectacle, with prosecutors leaning on forensic evidence to build their case. Surveillance footage, financial records, and Jeep's data painted a chilling story, but gaps in the narrative kept the case shrouded in uncertainty. With the courtroom as the final stage, the world awaited the truth. Would Thomas O'Donnell face justice, or would the mysteries of Michael Harding's murder remain forever unanswered? By early 2023, the trial of Thomas O'Donnell captivated the nation. The brutal murder of Michael Harding and the tragic death of Julie Harding had turned what seemed like a quiet marital fallout into a case riddled with betrayal and violence. The courtroom buzzed with tension as prosecutors worked to prove that O'Donnell was a cold-blooded killer, motivated by financial greed and acting at the behest of Julie Harding. The prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence but was woven into a compelling narrative. The burner phone, suspicious financial withdrawals, and surveillance footage formed the crux of their argument. They painted O'Donnell as a methodical planner who exploited the electronic lock on the vacant house, using anonymity and precision to set the stage for Michael's ambush. Expert witnesses were central to the case. FBI analysts testified about the burner phone's movements, tracking its signal across states and placing O'Donnell at the crime scene. Forensic accountants highlighted Julie Harding's large cash withdrawals, totaling over $222,000, just months before the murder. The proximity of these events to Michael's death created a damning timeline, suggesting the funds were part of a murder-for-hire scheme. O'Donnell's defense countered with vigor, emphasizing the circumstantial nature of the evidence. His lawyers argued that no direct connection, such as DNA or fingerprints, tied O'Donnell to the murder. They suggested Julie Harding, with her law enforcement training and emotional instability, could have orchestrated or even committed the crime herself. The absence of the murder weapon or eyewitness testimony became central to their argument for reasonable doubt. The trial took a dramatic turn when prosecutors presented previously unrevealed evidence. Cards recovered from Julie Harding's office, signed with O'Donnell's nickname Rab, suggested a close, potentially conspiratorial relationship between the two. The discovery bolstered the theory that Julie had enlisted O'Donnell to carry out the killing, though her precise motivations remained unclear. One of the most pivotal moments came with the replaying of surveillance footage. Grainy video showed O'Donnell's Toyota Tundra driving past the vacant house just hours before Michael's body was discovered. The timing was undeniable, aligning perfectly with the murder. The courtroom sat in silence as the prosecutor underscored the meticulous nature of O'Donnell's movements that day. Despite the mounting evidence, O'Donnell maintained his innocence, refusing to testify and invoking his Fifth Amendment rights. His silence left a void in the case, preventing either side from fully unraveling his motives or whether he acted alone. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. On June 15, 2023, Thomas O'Donnell was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, citing the premeditated nature of the crime and the financial gain involved, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While the prosecution had sought the death penalty, the absence of direct physical evidence tying O'Donnell to the murder weapon likely swayed the jury toward a lesser sentence. Even with the verdict, the case left many questions unanswered. Julie Harding's role loomed large over the trial, her intentions and actions clouded by speculation. Was she the calculating mastermind of a murder-for-hire plot, or had she been drawn into a deadly scheme by forces beyond her control? The cryptic note she left before her death, "Michael, I guess you still win," only deepened the mystery. For those who knew Michael and Julie, the trial marked the end of a harrowing chapter but brought little closure. What began as a marriage filled with promise had unraveled into betrayal, murder, and heartbreak, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and lingering doubts. Though the legal resolution brought some sense of justice, the emotional scars would remain long after the courtroom doors had closed. With the trial over, the families and communities connected to Michael and Julie Harding were left to confront the tragedy's aftermath. The courtroom had delivered a verdict, but the emotional scars and unanswered questions lingered. Their story was not just about one brutal murder. It was about the unraveling of human relationships and the desperate, often dark paths people take when pushed to the edge. For those who knew Michael Harding, the verdict brought some sense of justice, but not closure. Michael was a man defined by kindness and reliability, a steady presence in the lives of his friends and neighbors in Salina, Tennessee. He had been embracing his new life, finding peace in fishing and small-town connections. But his violent death overshadowed the image of the gentle, hard-working man his community had known. The terror and betrayal of his final moments left an indelible mark on those who loved him. Julie Harding's story became a cautionary tale. On the surface, she seemed to have it all: a respected position as a California Highway Patrol captain, a reputation for professionalism, and admiration from her peers. But beneath her polished exterior, she struggled with a failing marriage, financial pressures, and perhaps a growing sense of losing control over her life. Her alleged involvement in Michael's murder and her own tragic death painted a picture of a woman caught in a web she may have helped create, or been ensnared in by others. Thomas O'Donnell, convicted of Michael's murder, remained a puzzle. His silence during the trial left lingering doubts about his true motivations and the depth of his relationship with Julie. Was he merely a hired hand driven by greed, or was their connection more complex? Without his confession, many questions went unanswered, leaving a gap that even the most detailed investigation couldn't fill. The case also underscored the capabilities and limitations of modern forensic technology. Tools like cell phone tracking, financial records, and surveillance footage were pivotal in piecing together the events, but they couldn't reveal the emotional or psychological dynamics behind the actions. They showed where people were, but not why they acted as they did. In the end, the story of Michael and Julie Harding became a grim reminder of the fragility of human relationships. What began as a partnership full of promise unraveled into betrayal, violence, and death. Their tragic ends highlighted the destructive potential of unresolved conflict and unchecked emotions. For the communities they left behind, life moved on, but the scars remained. Neighbors in Salina remembered Michael's generosity with a mix of fondness and sadness, while Julie's colleagues in California struggled to reconcile the woman they admired with the events surrounding her death. As the dust settled, one truth stood out. This was a tragedy without neat answers or full understanding. It was a story of love turned sour, trust shattered, and lives lost too soon. Though the courtroom brought legal resolution, the emotional and moral questions raised by their story would haunt everyone involved for years to come. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more fascinating content. Your support keeps us digging deeper. See you in the next story. The Fateful Evening. A missing phone, traces of DNA, and a breathalyzer test at a random traffic stop. These were the threads that would finally unravel one of Italy's most puzzling murder mysteries. It was a crisp November evening in 2010 in Brembate di Sopra, a small, peaceful Italian town not far from Milan. The streets were quiet, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. Among the 7,000 residents, 13-year-old Yara Gambirasio stood out as a bright, lively girl who had a passion for gymnastics. On this particular evening, she left her home to visit the nearby sports center, a place she frequented often, just a few hundred yards away. Her purpose was simple: to return a stereo to her coach. She promised her parents she'd be back within the hour. The clock struck 7 p.m., and Yara had not returned. At first, her parents thought nothing of it. Perhaps she'd been delayed by a conversation with her friends, or stayed to practice a little longer. By 7:11 p.m., concern turned to panic when Yara's mother tried calling her, only to hear her phone go straight to voicemail. The family's anxiety grew as every passing minute felt like an eternity. By 8 p.m., they decided to call the police. Detective Letizia Ruggeri, a seasoned investigator from a nearby city, was immediately assigned to the case. She wasted no time dispatching officers to search the streets, question witnesses, and retrace Yara's steps. Her parents were frantic, the serene facade of their tranquil town shattered by an overwhelming sense of dread. The search efforts quickly expanded. Local police were joined by the military police, firefighters, and volunteers. They combed through every possible location: the sports center, nearby streets, and even the banks of a small river that ran through the town. Witnesses reported seeing a girl resembling Yara talking to two men near a red car that evening, but the lead was tenuous and unconfirmed. Search dogs brought in to track her scent led investigators in a puzzling direction, away from her home and toward a neighboring town called Mapello. Yet whispers of something darker began to emerge. Rumors that Yara might have been seen near an abandoned industrial site in Mapello. This lead introduced a sinister twist to the investigation. A few locals claimed to have heard faint cries near the site on the evening she disappeared, but when police arrived, they found no trace of her. This haunting detail raised chilling possibilities and deepened the mystery. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. The initial theories were grim. Either Yara had been kidnapped or, though less likely, she had run away. Her parents vehemently rejected the latter idea. Yara was a happy, grounded girl with no reason to leave. Adding to the mystery, her last known activity was a text sent to a friend at 6:44 p.m., suggesting she had planned to meet the friend the following day. Investigators scoured phone records, gathering data from 15,000 devices active in the area during the critical hours of Yara's disappearance. It was a daunting task, with officers working tirelessly to sift through the mountain of data. Despite their efforts, leads were sparse and hope began to wane. But for Detective Ruggieri, surrender was not an option. 3 months later, on February 26, 2011, a shocking discovery was made. A man flying a remote-controlled airplane in a field 6 miles from Yara's home stumbled upon a gruesome sight: human remains hidden beneath a pile of rags. The body was badly decomposed, but the clothes matched those Yara had worn the night she vanished. Her iPad, house keys, and SIM card were also found nearby, but her phone itself was missing. To complicate matters, early forensic analysis revealed fibers on the body that were traced back to a rare type of industrial fabric. The revelation sparked speculation about the possible involvement of someone connected to a local factory, a detail that would prove pivotal in the case. The quiet town of Brembate di Sopra was thrust into chaos. The disappearance of a beloved teenager had now become a murder investigation, plunging the community into an abyss of fear and heartbreak. The grim discovery sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Brembate di Sopra, leaving its residents grappling with an unshakable sense of loss. For Yara's parents, the news was nothing short of devastating. Their worst fears had been realized in the most horrific way imaginable. The peaceful, picturesque town they had always known was now cloaked in grief and haunted by whispers of fear and unanswered questions. How could something so monstrous happen in a place like this? Detective Letizia Ruggieri wasted no time arriving at the scene. The state of the body made identification difficult, but the clothing and personal belongings left no doubt it was Yara. Forensic experts were called in to examine the remains, and the findings were heart-wrenching. Yara had been stabbed multiple times, her body left exposed to the elements for months. Although there were no signs of sexual assault, the removal of some of her clothing suggested a chilling motive investigators dared not speak aloud. As the scene was scoured, an unsettling discovery came to light. Drag marks near the body hinted that Yara's body might have been moved post-mortem. The direction of these tracks suggested a vehicle had been used, raising the possibility that her killer was methodical, calculating, and, disturbingly, familiar with the area. Adding to the mystery, footprints leading into the field abruptly stopped midway, as though whoever carried her had vanished into thin air. This eerie detail fed into whispers of something more sinister, a planned, deliberate act by someone who knew how to cover their tracks. The discovery turned the investigation on its head. The police meticulously combed the field where Yara's body was found, hoping to uncover something, anything, that could shed light on what had happened. Fibers clinging to her clothing hinted at a type of fabric commonly used in local manufacturing, sparking theories about the killer's profession. Even more crucially, forensic teams recovered 2 traces of DNA, one from Yara's gloves and another from the battery of her missing phone. These tiny fragments of evidence became their first real leads, a fragile hope to cling to. Yet progress was agonizingly slow. The DNA samples, though significant, were only partial. Forensic teams struggled to extract a complete profile, and when they finally did, the results yielded no matches in existing criminal databases. It was as though the perpetrator had simply disappeared without a trace. Each passing day felt heavier than the last, frustrating the investigators and deepening the anguish of Yara's family and the community. As time dragged on, the media descended on the town, turning Yara's case into a national obsession. Reporters flooded the area, demanding updates, while sensational headlines painted a dark picture of a country grappling with its vulnerability. Some tabloids even hinted at occult rituals or criminal syndicates. further fanning the flames of speculation. Millions of Italians followed every development, their collective hope dwindling with each passing day. For Detective Ruggieri, the pressure was unrelenting. Criticism mounted from every corner. Politicians, journalists, and even the public questioned her ability to solve the case, but she refused to back down. Every lead, no matter how small, was scrutinized. Every avenue, no matter how remote, was explored. She was determined to bring justice to Yara's family, even as the trail grew colder by the day. Months later, a glimmer of hope reignited the investigation. Forensic experts succeeded in extracting a full DNA profile from biological material found on Yara's underwear. It belonged to an unknown man, likely the killer. With this breakthrough, Letizia mobilized her team for an unprecedented operation. Officers fanned out across the region, collecting DNA samples from anyone who might have had any connection to Yara, from her family and friends to employees at the sports center. Laboratories across Italy worked tirelessly to analyze the flood of submissions, but with thousands of samples, the process was painstakingly slow. As the investigation widened, the focus shifted to Mapello, the neighboring town where Yara's phone had last connected to a cell tower. Investigators speculated that the killer had transported her by car, likely taking her life in the remote field where her body was eventually found. Surveillance footage and phone records were pored over for clues, but the puzzle remained maddeningly incomplete. Among the footage, a shadowy figure near the edge of the field at dusk seemed suspicious, but the grainy quality made it impossible to confirm any details. Meanwhile, the town's grief began to morph into something darker: fear. If such a brutal crime could happen to Yara, in a town like theirs, who might be next? Parents began keeping their children indoors, locking their doors earlier than ever before. The case became more than just an investigation. It was a test of resilience for the entire community. And for Yara's family, it was an agonizing wait for answers they desperately needed, but feared might never come. As the months dragged on, the weight of unfulfilled promises and fading hope pressed heavily on Detective Letizia Ruggieri. What had once seemed like a beacon of possibility, the killer's DNA profile, now felt like an unsolvable puzzle. Thousands of DNA samples had been meticulously collected and tested, yet every result came back the same: no match. Each passing day added to the anguish of Yara's grieving family and the simmering frustration of the community, but Letizia refused to let go. For her, failure was simply not an option. In her determination to uncover the truth, Letizia began exploring unconventional methods to generate new leads. One of these ideas centered on a nightclub not far from the field where Yara's body had been found. Known for attracting a rough crowd, the club was a meeting ground for people with criminal records and questionable reputations. Letizia suspected that the killer might have frequented the place and decided to set up a bold operation. On weekends, officers discreetly stationed themselves outside the club, collecting saliva samples from visitors entering the venue. Membership records were also cross-referenced with the timeline of Yara's disappearance, in the hope of finding some overlooked connection. For weeks, there were no breakthroughs, just the growing silence of unanswered questions. Then, one night, the laboratory delivered an unexpected call. They had found a partial match: a man named Damiano. The match suggested that Damiano's DNA was closely related to the killer's. However, Damiano himself was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Records showed he had been out of the country at the time of Yara's disappearance. Despite this setback, the discovery was significant. The killer had to be a close relative of Damiano. Letizia and her team turned their focus to Damiano's family tree. They began meticulously piecing together connections, mapping out relationships that spanned generations. This unconventional approach, reminiscent of genetic genealogy, was groundbreaking at the time. Slowly but steadily, they unraveled the threads of Damiano's ancestry, and one startling discovery stood out. Damiano's mother had once worked as a housekeeper for Yara's family. While this raised eyebrows, there was no concrete evidence linking her or her immediate family to the crime. Months turned into years as Letizia's team dug deeper. Archival records dating back to the 1700s were unearthed, revealing hundreds of relatives connected through sprawling branches of the family tree. Then came the breakthrough they had been chasing: a link to a man named Giuseppe Geppi Guerinoni, who had passed away years earlier. Giuseppe's DNA, extracted from personal belongings preserved by his widow, revealed a vital clue. He was almost certainly the father or grandfather of the killer, but even this lead brought new complications. Giuseppe had 2 legitimate sons, and neither matched the killer's profile. The only explanation left was one fraught with sensitivity. Giuseppe must have fathered a child out of wedlock, a secret buried in the past. The revelation sent shockwaves through his surviving family, sparking denial, outrage, and whispered accusations that deepened the mystery. Determined to uncover the truth, Letizia's team began interviewing Giuseppe's acquaintances, searching for traces of a hidden affair. The trail led to a small spa town where Giuseppe had vacationed annually without his wife. Meticulous records from the spa pointed to a woman named Esther Arzufi, who had stayed there during the same period as Giuseppe. Esther, now elderly, had 3 children, including twins, a son, and a daughter. As investigators questioned Esther, she flatly denied any affair with Giuseppe, calling the allegations absurd. But as Letizia dug deeper, inconsistencies in Esther's story emerged. Witnesses from the spa recalled seeing her and Giuseppe together on more than one occasion, exchanging looks that suggested something far more intimate than a casual friendship. The investigators turned their attention to Esther's son, Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti, a construction worker who lived in the same region as Yara. His age and profile aligned with what they knew about the killer, yet they needed solid proof. Letizia orchestrated a covert plan. Officers set up a sobriety checkpoint on a road Massimo frequently used. When stopped, he unwittingly provided a saliva sample through a breathalyzer test, which was then sent to the lab. Tensions ran high as the sample was processed, but when the results finally arrived, they were conclusive and chilling. Massimo's DNA was a perfect match for the biological material found on Yara's underwear. But the twist didn't end there. Investigators discovered that Massimo had been unusually evasive about his movements on the night of Yara's disappearance. His alibi, once watertight, began to unravel under scrutiny. A grainy CCTV clip showed a vehicle resembling his van parked near the sports center just before Yara vanished. After nearly 4 years of tireless investigation, Letizia finally had her answer. The man responsible for Yara's murder had been identified, and he had been hiding in plain sight all along. On June 16, 2014, the quiet hum of an ordinary workday was shattered at a construction site in northern Italy. Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti, a seemingly unremarkable father of 3, was taken into custody by police. As word of his arrest spread, shock rippled through the community. Neighbors and colleagues couldn't reconcile the man they knew, a hard-working family man, with the heinous crime he was accused of. His family, blindsided by the allegations, stood in disbelief. How could someone like Massimo be capable of such horror? Massimo adamantly denied the accusations. He insisted he had never met Yara and had no explanation for how his DNA had ended up on her clothing. His wife and relatives rallied behind him, vouching for his character and offering alibis. But the evidence presented by investigators painted a chilling picture that was hard to ignore. The DNA match on Yara's underwear was irrefutable. Combined with Massimo's proximity to the crime scenes, it formed the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. As the investigation deepened, more troubling details emerged. Surveillance footage from the night Yara disappeared showed a vehicle matching Massimo's near the sports complex. The car had no license plates, a deliberate attempt to avoid identification. Fibers found on Yara's clothing were analyzed and matched the upholstery of Massimo's van, further tightening the noose around him. But the most spine-chilling detail emerged from Massimo's van itself. A faint but undeniable trace of Yara's blood on the door handle, a discovery that sent shockwaves through the courtroom when revealed. Massimo's internet search history added another disturbing layer to the case. Investigators uncovered searches pointing to dark and hidden desires involving minors. While these searches weren't directly tied to Yara's murder, they painted a damning portrait of a man whose private thoughts were far from innocent. Prosecutors argued this behavior provided a sinister motive, a horrifying glimpse into a man capable of unimaginable acts. The prosecution's theory was both chilling and methodical. They argued that Massimo had been observing Yara for weeks, studying her routines and waiting for the right moment to strike. On that fateful evening, they claimed, he intercepted her as she walked home. Whether through coercion or force, he got her into his van, drove her to the remote field, and ended her life to ensure she could never identify him. Massimo's defense team fought back with everything they had. They attacked the DNA evidence, arguing that contamination or procedural errors could not be ruled out. They pointed out that the type of DNA found on Yara's clothing could have originated from a distant relative, not necessarily Massimo. They even suggested that Massimo's regular nosebleeds could have left traces of his DNA in unknown locations, a possibility they said the prosecution had failed to consider. Witness inconsistencies and conflicting accounts of the van's movements that night were also used to challenge the timeline presented by the prosecution. Then came a surprising twist that complicated the narrative even further. Sylvia, a gym instructor from the sports complex Yara attended, was revealed to have her own blood on Yara's jacket. When questioned, Sylvia couldn't explain how it got there. Her behavior after Yara's disappearance, crying all night and deleting text messages, only deepened the mystery. Speculation swirled about a potential confrontation between Sylvia and Yara before the latter's disappearance. Could Sylvia have been inadvertently involved, or was this an unrelated coincidence? While these revelations raised serious questions, they weren't enough to shift the focus away from Massimo, whose DNA remained the prosecution's strongest weapon. The trial captivated Italy, turning into a national obsession. Millions followed the proceedings, divided between those convinced of Massimo's guilt and others who saw gaps and ambiguities in the case. The courtroom itself became a battleground, with emotionally charged testimonies and forensic experts fiercely debating the evidence. Yara's parents, dignified in their grief, attended every session, silently enduring the harrowing details of their daughter's final moments. After months of testimony and deliberation, the verdict came in the summer of 2016. Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti was found guilty of Yara's murder and sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom reaction was visceral. Relief for some, outrage for others. Many supporters of Massimo argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial, and lingering questions about Sylvia and other loose ends fueled their skepticism. For Yara's parents, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but it could never undo the devastating loss they had endured. The man who had stolen their daughter's life would now spend the rest of his behind bars. Yet even with the conviction, the case continued to haunt the public, leaving unanswered questions and the eerie possibility that not all the secrets had been unearthed. Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti's conviction marked the end of an arduous and deeply emotional chapter in the investigation. Yet, for many, the case felt far from resolved. While the verdict brought a measure of closure to Yara Gambirazio's grieving family, it left behind lingering doubts and unsettling questions that would haunt public discourse for years. In a shocking twist shortly after the trial, Massimo's wife, who had stood by his side throughout the investigation, visited him in prison and made a devastating confession. She admitted that none of their 3 children were biologically his, the result of long-hidden extramarital affairs. The revelation shattered Massimo's personal life and cast a darker shadow over his character, fueling speculation about his motives and his ability to deceive. Some wondered if the betrayal could have driven Massimo to harbor a darkness that culminated in his heinous crime, while others questioned if he was simply the scapegoat for a far more sinister truth. The enigma of Sylvia, the gym instructor whose blood was found on Yara's jacket, also refused to fade. Despite multiple rounds of questioning, Sylvia's responses remained vague and unconvincing. She could not explain why she had been crying inconsolably the night Yara disappeared, or why she had deleted messages exchanged with her brother shortly afterward. Speculation deepened when an anonymous tip alleged that Sylvia had an unreported argument with Yara a week before her disappearance, though no concrete evidence emerged to support this claim. Sylvia's unexplained connection to Yara's case became fertile ground for conspiracy theories. with some suggesting she may have been an unwitting participant in a larger scheme. Adding to the controversy, a whistleblower within the forensic lab later alleged that the chain of custody for the DNA samples had been briefly broken during testing. Although an internal investigation found no irregularities, the allegation cast a shadow over the case, fueling doubts about the integrity of the evidence. Critics of the conviction argued that the prosecution had leaned too heavily on forensic data while overlooking potential leads, such as unexplored ties between Sylvia and other suspects. For Yara's parents, these controversies were an added burden. The trial had brought them some solace, justice for their daughter, but the constant media scrutiny and the swirling rumors reopened wounds they desperately wanted to heal. Yet their quiet dignity and unwavering love for Yara inspired many. Their strength became a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the human capacity to endure even the most unimaginable pain. Despite his conviction, Massimo maintained his innocence. Over the years, he filed multiple appeals, hoping to overturn the verdict. Each appeal was met with the same conclusion. The evidence against him was compelling and conclusive. But Massimo's persistent claims of innocence reignited debates about the reliability of forensic evidence and the possibility of wrongful conviction. Some argued that his unyielding denials were the hallmark of a man who had been wrongly accused, while others saw them as the calculated lies of a man unwilling to face the truth. As the years passed, Yara's story transcended the boundaries of a single crime. It became a cautionary tale, a sobering reminder of the fragility of safety and the hidden dangers that can exist in even the most idyllic of communities. Her case also highlighted the extraordinary efforts of investigators, scientists, and ordinary citizens who refused to give up until justice was served. Yet the haunting details of Yara's murder and the complex web of evidence surrounding it ensured her case would remain one of Italy's most infamous crimes. For those who followed her story, the lingering question persisted. Was justice truly served? Or was the real truth buried in layers of deceit and silence? Could there have been accomplices? Or was Massimo the lone predator he was painted to be? Yara Gambiracio's legacy is both heartbreaking and enduring. Her story continues to serve as a call to action, a reminder of the preciousness of life, the resilience of love, and the unrelenting pursuit of truth, no matter how elusive it may be. Her case, with its twists and shadows, remains a chilling testament to the mysteries that can lie beneath the surface of even the most conclusive evidence. A legacy of heartbreak and unanswered questions. Years have passed since the tragic death of Yara Gambiraccio, yet her memory remains deeply etched in the hearts of her hometown and across the nation of Italy. For her family, the loss is a wound that time cannot heal, a void that no justice can ever truly fill. While the quiet streets of Brembate di Sopra have reclaimed their tranquility, the shadow of Yara's absence lingers as a constant reminder of the horrors that once shattered their peace. The laughter of children, the routines of the townsfolk, and the picturesque scenery all feel incomplete, haunted by the memory of a girl whose life was stolen too soon. Detective Letizia Ruggeri, the relentless investigator whose work led to the conviction of Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti, remains a polarizing figure. To many, her dedication and use of genetic genealogy were heroic, a testament to her resolve to find Yara's killer. Her determination ensured that Yara's story would not fade into obscurity. Yet others question the methods that brought about Bossetti's conviction, pointing to unanswered questions. Critics argue that reliance on DNA evidence, while groundbreaking, overshadowed other leads. Controversies surrounding Sylvia, the gym instructor, and gaps in the timeline spark ongoing debate, keeping the case alive in the public consciousness. Massimo himself, confined behind prison walls, continues to proclaim his innocence. For some, his steadfast denial is a chilling reminder of guilt's arrogance. For others, it raises doubts about the justice system. Despite the evidence presented in court, his life sentence has done little to quell speculation. Massimo portrays himself as a scapegoat, a victim of flawed practices. While his claims have been dismissed by courts, they resonate with a vocal group of supporters. Periodic media coverage fuels theories and old questions, keeping the case in the public eye. Yara's case profoundly impacted Italy's criminal justice system, exposing the power and limitations of forensic science. The groundbreaking use of genetic genealogy marked a turning point, showing how advanced technology could uncover hidden truths. It has inspired investigators worldwide to adopt similar techniques. Yet, the case also revealed the emotional toll on families seeking answers, investigators pursuing justice, and communities grappling with fear. It underscored the balance between innovation and human intuition, showing even advanced methods are not infallible. For Yara's parents, the years have been a delicate balance between honoring their daughter and carrying on. Their quiet resilience has inspired many. Instead of letting grief consume them, they have become advocates for child safety and community vigilance. Channeling their loss into a mission to protect others, they established initiatives in Yara's name, fostering awareness about child protection and encouraging dialogue about the responsibilities communities bear in safeguarding their most vulnerable members. Their strength is a beacon of hope, showing love can persevere even in tragedy. Despite the closure brought by the conviction, haunting details of Yara's murder linger. Questions remain unanswered, and debates about the investigation's integrity persist. Was justice truly served, or are truths still buried? Could there have been accomplices or overlooked evidence? The case is a stark reminder of justice's complexities and the fragile line between certainty and doubt. Yara's story is far more than a tale of crime and punishment. It is a sobering reminder of innocence's fragility and the hidden dangers that lurk even in peaceful places. It is also a testament to the relentless pursuit of justice, a pursuit often messy and painful but essential. Her case serves as a cautionary tale, urging communities to remain vigilant, never take safety for granted, and advocate for justice for those who cannot speak for themselves. For those who followed her story, Yara Gambirasio is more than a name in a case file. She was a vibrant girl, full of dreams, laughter, and promise, a life stolen too soon. Her legacy remains a haunting echo, urging communities to protect children, cherish loved ones, and seek truth, no matter how elusive. In this way, Yara's spirit endures, a force reminding the world of what was lost and must never be forgotten. The strength of her family and the resilience of her community ensure Yara's name will never fade, a symbol of hope, love, and justice in the face of unimaginable loss. The summer heat still lingered in Fairfield, Ohio, on the night of August 13, 2011. Inside a small apartment complex on Dorshire Drive, 21-year-old Caitlin Markham was just days away from her birthday, putting the finishing touches on her graphic design portfolio. The clock was ticking toward midnight, and in less than 24 hours she would vanish without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt her community for over a decade. Her apartment showed no signs of struggle. Keys still on the counter, wallet untouched. Her beloved dog pacing anxiously by the door. Her car remained parked outside, exactly where she had left it. It was as if Caitlin had simply evaporated into the warm summer air, leaving behind a life frozen in time. Wedding magazines scattered on her coffee table, a half-finished art project on her desk, and text messages to her fiancé John Carter that would never be answered. "Something's wrong," John would later tell the 911 dispatcher on August 14th, his voice carrying an edge that investigators would spend years analyzing. She wouldn't just disappear. She wouldn't just leave her dog like this. The responding officer noted something unusual that evening. The front door had been unlocked, a detail that seemed innocuous at first but would later take on a more sinister significance. For a young woman who lived alone, an unlocked door raised the first of many red flags in what would become one of Ohio's most perplexing missing persons cases. In the days that followed, Fairfield would witness an unprecedented community response. Over 100 volunteers combed through woods, searched abandoned buildings, and plastered missing person posters across 3 counties. Local news crews captured the image of John Carter, Caitlin's fiancé of 1 year, his voice breaking as he addressed the cameras. "Please, if anyone knows anything, help us bring her home." But as summer faded into fall, and fall gave way to winter, Caitlin remained missing. The investigation would uncover layers of secrets, shattered alibis, and a web of relationships that would eventually lead to a shocking conclusion. One that would leave an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and justice. What happened to Caitlin Markham in those crucial hours between midnight and dawn? The answer would take 12 years to emerge, and when it did, it would shake the foundations of Fairfield's justice system and leave an indelible mark on everyone involved in the case. Born on August 16, 1989, Caitlin Markham embodied the creative spirit of her hometown, Fairfield, Ohio. Those who knew her described a young woman whose artistic talent was matched only by her ability to light up any room she entered. Her father, Dave Markham, would later tell investigators Caitlin had this gift. She could make friends with anyone, even the shyest kid on the playground. By the summer of 2011, Caitlin was just weeks away from completing her graphic design degree at the Art Institute of Ohio, Cincinnati. Her portfolio showcased a promising future: vibrant digital designs, thoughtful layouts, and the kind of raw creativity that professors said could take her far in the industry. She wasn't just talented, her academic advisor would later testify. She had vision. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, cracks had begun to appear. In the months leading up to her disappearance, close friends noticed subtle changes in Caitlin's behavior. Sarah Mitchell, her best friend since high school, later revealed to detectives she started getting quieter, more withdrawn. When I asked about the wedding plans, she'd changed the subject. Her relationship with John Carter had begun 6 years earlier, when they were both teenagers. High school sweethearts who seemed destined for a fairy tale ending, they got engaged in 2010. The couple had dreams of starting fresh in Colorado after Caitlin's graduation. They'd even started looking at apartments in Denver. John and Caitlin appeared perfect together, recalled neighbor Lisa Thompson. But looking back, there were signs we all missed. Thompson would later describe hearing occasional arguments from Caitlin's apartment, though at the time she'd dismissed them as normal couple disagreements. Friends later revealed to investigators that Caitlin had confided in them about troubling changes in John's behavior. He had reportedly become more controlling, questioning her about male classmates and growing increasingly agitated about her late-night study sessions at the art studio. One friend who requested anonymity told police, "She mentioned thinking about breaking off the engagement, but she was scared of how he might react." Work colleagues at the bridal shop where Caitlin held a part-time job remembered her as unfailingly reliable. She never missed a shift without calling. Her manager, Karen Reynolds, stated, "That's why that Sunday morning was so strange. It wasn't like her at all." The last project in Caitlin's portfolio, found on her laptop after her disappearance, was hauntingly prophetic, a series of butterfly designs symbolizing transformation and freedom. Her professor would later note that it was some of her best work, showing an artist on the cusp of finding her true voice. On her bedroom wall hung a calendar marked with 2 significant dates: August 16th, her upcoming 22nd birthday, and December 15th, her graduation day. She would never celebrate either milestone. Saturday, August 13th, 2011, began like any other summer day in Fairfield. The timestamp on Caitlin's last Instagram post showed 7:30 p.m. A photo of her art project captioned, "Almost finished. Hasinecker graduation, each hot can't wait to move." It would be the last public trace of her life. That evening, John Carter and their mutual friend Michael Strauss arrived at Caitlin's apartment around 8 p.m. Security footage from the apartment complex's parking lot captured their arrival. According to Carter's initial statement to police, they were just hanging out, watching TV while Caitlin worked on her laptop, finishing some project. Nothing seemed out of ordinary, he insisted. Michael Strauss left the apartment at 11:22 p.m. He would later tell investigators that while Caitlin seemed quieter than usual, perhaps stressed about deadlines, there was nothing that raised any immediate concerns. The next few hours would become the focus of intense scrutiny by investigators. Carter claimed he left shortly after Strauss around 11:30 p.m. to attend a party with other friends. Cell phone records revealed what would be their final exchange. At 11:36 p.m., Caitlin texted John asking him to let her know when he arrived. He responded at 11:45 p.m. confirming he'd reached the party. At 11:48 p.m., Caitlin sent him a photo of her artwork. His last message came at 12:03 a.m., asking if she was getting tired. At 12:06 a.m., Caitlin's phone went dark. It would never activate again. In what would later become crucial testimony, two teenagers, Sarah Jensen and Kyle Roberts, were sneaking out for their own late-night adventure when they witnessed something unusual. Around 2 a.m., they saw two cars pull up to John's mother's house with their headlights off. They recognized one as John's car, which struck them as odd since he was supposedly at a party across town. The next morning brought the first signs that something was terribly wrong. Caitlin didn't show up for her shift at the bridal shop. Her manager, Karen Reynolds, called her cell phone repeatedly at 11:00 a.m., but each time it went straight to voicemail, something that had never happened before. The day stretched into evening before John Carter finally made the call to 911 at 7:12 p.m. The conversation with the dispatcher would later be scrutinized by investigators for its seemingly rehearsed quality. Carter reported his fiancée missing, explaining that while her car was still there and her dog was in the apartment, Caitlin herself had vanished. When asked if this was unusual behavior, his voice cracked as he insisted she would never just leave like this. Officer James Martinez's arrival at the apartment at 7:30 p.m. marked the beginning of the official investigation. The scene he encountered would later haunt him. The front door was unlocked with no signs of forced entry. Caitlin's wallet sat on the kitchen counter, still containing $97. Her car keys hung by the door, her laptop lay closed on the coffee table, and her unfed dog paced anxiously. Everything looked perfectly in place. Too perfect, as Martinez would later testify, as if meticulously arranged for investigators to find. As night fell, Caitlin's father arrived at the apartment, his face etched with worry. Standing before the growing crowd of reporters, he spoke words that would prove heartbreakingly prophetic. "Something terrible has happened to my daughter. I can feel it." He couldn't have known then how right he was or that the truth would take 12 long years to emerge. The first 48 hours of Caitlin's disappearance transformed the quiet streets of Fairfield into a hub of frantic activity. By Monday morning, August 15th, more than 100 volunteers had gathered at the police command center, ready to begin the search. Among them stood John Carter, appearing distraught and eager to help, even as detectives began noticing the first of many inconsistencies in his story. Detective Sarah Morgan, the lead investigator assigned to the case, immediately picked up on subtle details that didn't align. During his initial interview, Carter's demeanor shifted noticeably when questioned about specific times and locations. More striking were the fresh scratches on his neck, which he attributed to a hasty morning shave. "People react differently to stress," Morgan noted in her preliminary report, but something about his responses felt rehearsed. The investigation quickly uncovered troubling patterns in the digital evidence. While Carter claimed he'd texted Caitlin a "good morning" message on Sunday as usual, phone records showed no such message existed. More concerning were the deleted text messages from Saturday night, a gap in their conversation that Carter couldn't explain. When pressed about the missing texts, he stammered, "I don't remember deleting anything. Maybe the phone did it automatically?" Meanwhile, the search effort expanded across 3 counties. Helicopters swept low over wooded areas while volunteers combed through every abandoned building, empty lot, and drainage ditch within a 5-mile radius of Caitlin's apartment. Local news crews captured the intensity of the search, with Carter appearing regularly on camera, his voice breaking as he pleaded for information about his fiancée's whereabouts. But behind the scenes, investigators were piecing together a very different picture. Neighbors from Caitlin's apartment complex came forward with accounts of an argument they'd heard late Saturday night. One resident, Eleanor Martinez, reported hearing what sounded like banging and someone repeatedly saying "no" in a quiet voice around midnight. This timeline directly contradicted Carter's claim that he'd left for the party by 11:30 p.m. The case took another turn when detectives interviewed the teenagers who'd spotted the cars at Carter's mother's house. Their account of seeing him return home at 2 a.m. with another vehicle, lights off, moving quietly, shattered his party alibi. When confronted with this information, Carter's explanation shifted. "I might have stopped home to grab something," he said, "but I don't remember another car." Perhaps most disturbing was what investigators found when they began interviewing Caitlin's close friends. Several came forward with stories of concerning behavior in the months leading up to her disappearance. One friend, Rachel Stevens, revealed that Caitlin had confided in her about John's increasing possessiveness and volatile temper. "She told me she was thinking about calling off the engagement," Stevens told detectives, "but she was afraid of how he'd react." The investigation also revealed that Carter's laptop activity didn't match his story. While he claimed to have been watching movies at home after the party, forensic analysis showed only browser tabs being opened. No actual video playback was detected. It was as if someone had deliberately created a digital alibi without actually using the computer. As the first week drew to a close, Detective Morgan faced a troubling reality. Their prime suspect had been right in front of them all along, participating in searches, giving interviews, and playing the role of the grieving fiancé, but proving it would take more than circumstantial evidence and inconsistent statements. Like many cases that would later haunt investigators, the most obvious suspect was often the hardest to prosecute. By Friday, August 19th, the search operation had covered over 1,000 acres without finding a single trace of Caitlin. Her father, Dave Markham, stood before reporters, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. "Someone knows something," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious pain. "Please, if you know anything about what happened to my daughter, come forward." He couldn't have known then that the truth would remain hidden for over a decade, buried beneath layers of lies and carefully constructed alibis. April the 10th, 2013, dawned cold and gray in Cedar Grove, Indiana. Andy Mitchell, a local scrap metal collector, was searching through a wooded area near Big Cedar Creek when he noticed something unusual: a black garbage bag partially hidden beneath scattered leaves. What he discovered inside would finally break open the case that had haunted Ohio for nearly 2 years. Inside the bag, Mitchell found human remains. His hands trembling, he immediately called 911. "I think I found something you need to see," he told the dispatcher, his voice barely steady. "Something that shouldn't be here." Indiana State Police arrived within minutes, quickly cordoning off what would become one of the most significant crime scenes in the investigation. The location itself spoke volumes to investigators. Cedar Grove sat just 30 minutes from Fairfield, along a route that John Carter frequently traveled to visit his father's farm. The remains had been discarded near a pile of trash, suggesting the killer hadn't even attempted to bury them, a detail that struck investigators as both brazen and personal. Forensic analysis confirmed what many had feared. The remains were those of Caitlin Markham. The discovery of a stab wound on one of her arm bones provided the first concrete evidence of foul play, though the full extent of her injuries proved impossible to determine due to decomposition. Dr. Elizabeth Curtis, the forensic anthropologist who examined the remains, noted signs of dismemberment. "This wasn't a crime of opportunity," she would later testify. "This required planning and determination." The location of Caitlin's remains triggered a fresh wave of investigation. Detective Morgan's team began mapping John Carter's movements in the days following Caitlin's disappearance. Cell phone tower data showed his phone pinging near Cedar Grove multiple times that August, though he had never mentioned traveling to Indiana during initial interviews. The black garbage bags containing Caitlin's remains yielded another crucial piece of evidence. They matched a distinct type sold at only one local store, the same store where security footage showed John Carter making a purchase late on August 13, 2011. When confronted with this information, Carter claimed he'd bought the bags for household use, but could not produce any witnesses to verify this claim. Inside Caitlin's remains, forensics teams found traces of a unique pollen specific to a type of flower that grew only in one location in the area, directly behind John Carter's mother's house. This microscopic evidence placed Caitlin's body at that location before it reached its final resting place in Cedar Grove. The discovery devastated Caitlin's family, but also brought a grim sort of relief. Dave Markham, speaking to reporters outside the coroner's office, struggled to maintain composure. "We finally know where she is," he said, his voice breaking. "But now we need to know who did this to her and why." He couldn't have known that even with these new revelations, it would take another decade before justice would finally catch up with his daughter's killer. John Carter's reaction to the discovery raised more red flags. While appearing appropriately distraught in public, investigators noted his primary concern seemed to be how the media was portraying him. During one interview, he spent more time complaining about news coverage than discussing Caitlin. Dady Morgan's notes from that interview read, "Subject shows more animation discussing his own image than his deceased fiancée." As spring turned to summer in 2013, the investigation entered a new phase. They had a crime scene, forensic evidence, and a growing list of inconsistencies in their prime suspect's story. What they still lacked was the one piece of evidence that would tie it all together, a smoking gun that would turn circumstantial evidence into proof beyond reasonable doubt. The years following the discovery of Caitlin's remains marked a period of frustrating near misses for investigators. While evidence pointed toward John Carter, prosecutors feared they lacked the concrete proof needed for a conviction. But in 2023, a series of unexpected developments would finally break the case wide open. The first breakthrough came from Carter's own home. During a renewed search of his mother's house, where he had lived in 2011, investigators discovered something chilling in his old bedroom, a collection of handwritten poems that read more like confessions. One particularly disturbing entry contained the lines, "Deep down, I love her. You have to kill her, but I love her. She has to die." When confronted with these writings, Carter claimed they were merely creative exercises, but forensics dated the paper and ink to the summer of 2011. More damning evidence emerged when detectives re-interviewed Carter's friend Jonathan, who had been with him the night Caitlin vanished. After 12 years of silence, Jonathan finally cracked under intensive questioning. He revealed that Carter had called him in a panic around 1 a.m. that night, asking for help moving something heavy. Jonathan admitted to meeting Carter at his mother's house, but claimed he left when he realized what might have happened. His testimony placed Carter with Caitlin's body at the exact time the teenage witnesses had reported seeing two cars. The investigation also uncovered disturbing patterns in Carter's subsequent relationships. His current wife had filed several domestic incident reports describing episodes of rage and controlling behavior. Video footage from their home security system captured Carter in the midst of violent outbursts, revealing a side of him that starkly contrasted with the grieving fiancé persona he had maintained for years. Perhaps the most shocking revelation came from Carter's own cell phone. While the original phone from 2011 was long gone, detectives discovered cloud backups containing deleted photos from the night of Caitlin's disappearance. Among them was an image of Caitlin's apartment taken after midnight, when Carter claimed he was at a party across town. The metadata told a story he couldn't explain away. March 2023 brought the moment Caitlin's family had waited 12 years to see. Detective Morgan, now nearing retirement, had the satisfaction of placing handcuffs on John Carter. As she read him his rights, she noted that his primary concern wasn't the charges. It was whether the media had been notified. In that moment, Morgan would later write in her report, "I saw the mask finally slip completely." The arrest sent shockwaves through Fairfield. People who had stood beside Carter during searches, who had comforted him during vigils, now grappled with the betrayal. One search volunteer, Mary Thompson, told reporters through tears, "We were looking for her with her killer. He watched us search while knowing exactly where she was." But the most heart-wrenching moment came during Carter's arraignment. Dave Markham, who had spent 12 years fighting for justice, sat silently in the courtroom as prosecutors detailed how his daughter's fiancé had strangled her during an argument, then methodically disposed of her body. "The hardest part," Dave would later say, "wasn't just losing Caitlin. It was knowing that the man who killed her hugged me at her memorial service." The investigation had uncovered the truth, but the path to justice would prove more complicated than anyone expected. As prosecutors prepared their case, they faced a challenging reality. Much of their evidence, though compelling, remained circumstantial. The question wasn't just whether Carter had killed Caitlin, it was whether they could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. June 2024 brought a development that would shake the community's faith in the justice system. Despite the mountain of circumstantial evidence, prosecutors faced a difficult decision. Without direct physical evidence linking Carter to the murder, they worried about securing a conviction at trial. This led to a controversial plea deal that would haunt Fairfield for years to come. John Carter stood before Judge Michael Anderson on a sweltering summer morning, his face expressionless as he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. The reduction from murder charges meant he would face a maximum of just 3 years in prison. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers as the terms were read. Dave Markham, given the opportunity to address his daughter's killer, delivered a statement that brought even hardened court officers to tears. "For 12 years, you watched me search for my daughter. For 12 years, you sat across from me at dinner, knowing what you had done. You didn't just kill Caitlin, you tortured our entire family with your silence." The plea deal revealed disturbing details through Carter's required admission of guilt, though he carefully avoided sharing specifics about the murder itself. He acknowledged being in Caitlin's apartment that night, admitted to an altercation that got out of hand, and confirmed disposing of her body in Indiana. But the full truth of what happened in those final moments remained locked away with him. Detective Morgan, watching from the gallery, later described the feeling of helplessness. "We knew he did it. He knew we knew. But knowing and proving are two different things in our justice system." The prosecution's dilemma had been clear: risk a trial with circumstantial evidence and possibly see Carter walk free, or secure a conviction with a lesser sentence. The community's reaction was immediate and fierce. Protests erupted outside the courthouse. Local news channels captured footage of demonstrators holding signs reading, "3 years for a life," and "Justice for Caitlin." Social media exploded with outrage as people struggled to understand how 12 years of investigation could end with such a light sentence. Carter's cellmate would later come forward with claims that Carter had confessed to more details during late-night conversations. According to the inmate, Carter described strangling Caitlin during an argument about their relationship, claiming, "She said she was going to leave me." However, these jailhouse confessions came too late to impact the case. Meanwhile, investigations into potential accomplices continued. Carter's friend Jonathan faced perjury charges for his years of false statements, though prosecutors ultimately dropped these charges due to lack of evidence. The mystery of the second car seen that night remained unsolved, another piece of the puzzle that might never fall into place. July 19, 2024, marked Carter's final court appearance for sentencing. Judge Anderson, bound by the plea agreement's terms, had no choice but to impose the 3-year sentence. His frustration was evident as he addressed Carter. The tragedy here is not just the loss of a young woman's life, but the mockery this sentence makes of justice. Unfortunately, the law sometimes fails to provide the punishment that true justice demands. As Carter was led away in handcuffs, Caitlin's father made one final statement to the press: 3 years for my daughter's life. He'll be out before he turns 40, with most of his life ahead of him. Meanwhile, we serve a life sentence without Caitlin. Where's the justice in that? The autumn of 2024 brought a strange quiet to Fairfield, Ohio. John Carter began serving his 3-year sentence at the Lebanon Correctional Institution, while the community grappled with the unsettling aftermath of a case that had haunted them for over a decade. Detective Morgan, in her final press conference before retirement, addressed the lingering questions that continued to trouble investigators. "We know there's more to this story," she stated, her voice heavy with the weight of unfinished business. "Someone else knows what happened that night. The second car, the missing hours, the way her body was moved. These pieces suggest Carter didn't act alone. The investigation into possible accomplices remained active, focusing particularly on the connection between Carter, his friend Jonathan, and Michael Strauss, the man later convicted of killing another young woman in a nearby town. The trio's appearance together in photographs from a music festival took on new significance as investigators explored the possibility of a darker, shared history. Carter's new life behind bars brought unexpected developments. Fellow inmates reported his strange behavior, moments of apparent remorse followed by calculated attempts to manipulate his story. One corrections officer noted in his report, inmate Carter spends hours writing in his journal, but tears out and destroys certain pages. When asked about Caitlin, he alternates between claiming total memory loss and hinting at details only the killer would know. Meanwhile, the case sparked changes in how local law enforcement handled missing persons investigations. The Fairfield Police Department implemented new protocols dubbed Caitlin's Guidelines, requiring immediate digital evidence collection and faster escalation of suspicious disappearances. "Her case taught us that the first 48 hours are crucial," explained Police Chief Robert Martinez. "We can't afford to wait when someone vanishes under suspicious circumstances." Caitlin's father channeled his grief into action, establishing the Caitlin Markham Justice Foundation. The organization works to support families of missing persons and advocates for stronger domestic violence laws. "If we can prevent even one family from going through what we did," Dave Markham said during the foundation's launch, "then some good will have come from this tragedy." The art community at the Art Institute of Ohio Cincinnati created a permanent memorial, a gallery featuring Caitlin's final works, including the prophetic butterfly designs found on her laptop. Her professor reflected, "These pieces show not just talent, but a soul on the verge of breaking free. That makes them all the more heartbreaking. But perhaps the most profound impact remained invisible. The way the case changed how people in Fairfield viewed their neighbors, their relationships, and the facade of small-town safety. As one resident put it, "We learned that monsters don't look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the boy next door, the grieving fiancé, the friend searching alongside you. When Carter becomes eligible for release in 2027, he'll walk free before his 40th birthday. The butterfly designs that Caitlin created will have outlived her by 16 years. Her father keeps a digital frame in his living room, cycling through photos of his daughter. The hardest part, he says, isn't the length of his sentence. It's knowing that we'll never know everything that happened that night. Some truths died with Caitlin. The case files remain open. Somewhere in Fairfield, someone still holds secrets about that August night. And while John Carter sits in his cell, the echoes of his crimes continue to ripple through the community, reminding everyone that justice, like truth, sometimes comes in imperfect measures. The Schmidt family's final journey. One peaceful camping trip turned into Cedar Falls' darkest nightmare, leaving a 9-year-old boy as the only survivor. The Schmidt family, Tyler, Sarah, 9-year-old Arlo, and 7-year-old Lula, embodied the essence of a loving, close-knit family. Active and kind, they were beloved members of their Cedar Falls community. Tyler and Sarah, childhood sweethearts, shared a passion for the outdoors that became the foundation of their family life. Whether hiking, canoeing, or stargazing under Iowa's vast skies, they found joy in nature and passed that love to their children. In July 2022, seeking a reprieve from the summer heat, the Schmidts planned a camping trip to Maquoketa Caves State Park, known for its rugged beauty and enchanting caves. For Arlo and Lula, it promised adventure. For Tyler and Sarah, a chance to unwind and create new family memories. On July 21st, they packed their car and arrived at the bustling park by late afternoon, setting up their tent near the entrance. Families played. Tents dotted the landscape, and the sun set over the dense foliage as the Schmidts embraced the serenity of the wilderness. By nightfall, the family settled into their tent, surrounded by the calming sounds of nature. Nearby, the Sherwin family from Nebraska camped just 200 feet away. The evening passed uneventfully, a peaceful lull before unimaginable terror. At 4 a.m., the tranquility was shattered. A man, dressed in black and armed, crept into the Schmidts' tent. Tyler, jolted awake, was the first to face the assailant's savage attack, slashed and shot as he fought to protect his family. Sarah's screams were silenced by swift, merciless blows. Lula's cries pierced the night, but the attacker showed no mercy. She, too, was brutally murdered, shot, and strangled. Amid the chaos, young Arlo managed to escape, running barefoot through the darkness, his mind unable to process the horror he had fled. As dawn broke over Maquoketa Caves State Park, it revealed a crime scene of devastating brutality that would leave an indelible mark on Cedar Falls and beyond. The Schmidts' tent stood torn and bloodied, a chilling reminder of the night that turned their peaceful family escape into a nightmare that would haunt all who heard their story. A frantic escape and a community in chaos. In the pitch-black night, 9-year-old Arlo ran barefoot through the campground, his heart racing and tears streaming down his face. Fear gripped his small body as every shadow seemed menacing, and every rustle of leaves felt like a threat. His only thought was to escape the unimaginable horror he had just fled. At a nearby campsite, Cecilia and Joe Sherwin were startled awake by faint cries, which soon turned into desperate screams piercing the still night. Alarmed, Cecilia looked out to see a terrified Arlo running toward them. His voice cracked as he sobbed, "My parents, they're hurt. They've been shot." Joe grabbed a flashlight and rushed toward the commotion, calling for help. Cecilia held Arlo's trembling hand and guided him to the park's entrance. Shaking, she dialed 911, her voice breaking as she reported, "There's been a shooting. A child says his family has been attacked. Please send help immediately." The campground was soon buzzing with confusion. Campers emerged from their tents, exchanging nervous glances and speculating about what had happened. Some guessed it was a wild animal attack, while others remained silent, gripped by fear. Park rangers, responding to the frantic call, arrived swiftly. What they found shocked even the most seasoned among them. The Schmidts' tent was torn and bloodied, its disarray telling a story of violence and chaos. Inside, the bodies of Tyler, Sarah, and Lula lay lifeless, each bearing the signs of a brutal and merciless attack. The serene campsite had transformed into a scene of unimaginable tragedy, its peace shattered in an instant. The hunt for the killer. As dawn broke over Maquoketa Caves State Park, law enforcement descended upon the serene campsite, now a harrowing crime scene. Yellow police tape surrounded the Schmidts' tent as forensic teams meticulously gathered evidence. The brutality of the murders left even seasoned investigators shaken. Tyler and Sarah had been stabbed and slashed multiple times, while Lula, just 7 years old, showed signs of strangulation and a gunshot wound. 9-year-old Arlo, the sole survivor, was taken into police custody for his safety. Despite his trauma, he provided a chilling detail. The attacker was dressed entirely in black. The deliberate violence and lack of stolen belongings pointed investigators toward a premeditated and calculated act. The search for the assailant began immediately. Park rangers and officers combed the area, concerned the killer might still be nearby. Suspicion quickly turned to 23-year-old Anthony Sherwin, a camper staying just 200 feet from the Schmidts. Sherwin was missing during the morning roll call, raising alarm. By late morning, the search ended with the discovery of Sherwin's lifeless body in a wooded area of the park. A ghost gun, untraceable due to the lack of serial numbers, lay beside him. Authorities issued their initial theory. Sherwin, armed and motivated by unknown reasons, had killed the Schmidt family before taking his own life. At first glance, the case seemed resolved, yet the more investigators delved into the details, the more inconsistencies surfaced, unraveling the narrative and leaving more questions than answers. Twists in the investigation. The discovery of Anthony Sherwin's body brought both relief and uncertainty. Found near the crime scene with a firearm beside him, it seemed to confirm his guilt. Yet critical questions persisted. What could have driven a young man with no history of violence to commit such a heinous act? And why target the Schmidt family? Complete strangers, Sherwin's parents, Cecilia and Joe, were adamant about their son's innocence. They described him as a kind and introverted young man, their camping trip peaceful until it turned into tragedy. Cecilia openly questioned the investigation, suggesting her son may have been murdered and framed. Autopsy results, however, supported the authorities' conclusions. Sherwin had died from a gunshot wound consistent with suicide, and the firearm, a homemade ghost gun, was believed to have been used in the Schmidt murders. But Cecilia pointed to inconsistencies. including the description of the attacker dressed in black, while Anthony had been wearing green shorts and a t-shirt. As media attention grew, details emerged that complicated the case. Sherwin, though academically gifted, had an obsessive interest in firearms and had built the ghost gun himself. His parents claimed this hobby was recreational, but the lack of a serial number and absence of motive left investigators and the public grasping for answers. The location of Sherwin's body, deep in the woods and far from the Schmidt's tent, only deepened the mystery. How did he evade detection for hours after the attack? Did he take his own life? Or was there a possibility of foul play? Unanswered questions sowed doubt, leaving many to wonder if the full truth was being revealed. The Iowa Department of Public Safety insisted the evidence tied Sherwin to the murders, citing forensic analysis. Yet officials provided little clarity on ballistic tests or DNA evidence, frustrating critics and fueling demands for an independent investigation. Meanwhile, Cedar Falls grappled with the tragedy's aftermath. Friends and neighbors rallied around Arlo, the 9-year-old survivor, while struggling to comprehend the senselessness of the crime. The case became a haunting narrative of horror, suspicion, and unanswered questions, one that would leave a lasting scar on everyone involved. A community grieves and doubts linger. As news of the brutal murders spread, the town of Cedar Falls was overcome with grief. The Schmidt family, beloved members of the community, had touched countless lives, and their tragic deaths sent shockwaves through the region. Vigils were held, candles lit, and flowers placed at the Cedar Falls Public Library where Sarah had worked. A sign displayed at the library read, "Gone too soon, but forever in our hearts," a tribute that captured the deep sorrow felt by the townspeople. Tyler's colleagues at the software company where he worked for nearly 2 decades remembered him as a dedicated professional and devoted father. Sarah's co-workers described her as a source of warmth and kindness, someone who brightened every room she entered. The loss of Lula, a 7-year-old with her whole life ahead of her, was especially devastating, leaving an unfillable void. As the community mourned, unease began to grow. The official account, that Anthony Sherwin, in an inexplicable act of violence, had killed the Schmidts before taking his own life, faced skepticism. Many questioned the randomness of the attack. How could such a savage crime occur without motive? The Sherwin family's vocal defense of Anthony added to the uncertainty. Cecilia Sherwin, steadfast in her belief in her son's innocence, publicly challenged the investigation. She argued that the lack of transparency and absence of conclusive forensic evidence raised serious doubts. Her claims fueled speculation, with some in the community questioning whether a second person could have been involved or if Anthony had been framed. Rumors swirled as the lack of a clear motive deepened the mystery. Investigators insisted that Sherwin acted alone, but declined to release critical details, including ballistic results or a timeline of events. This silence left many unconvinced and added to the lingering doubts. For Arlo, the 9-year-old survivor, life was irreversibly altered. Taken in by Sarah's brother, he faced a future marked by resilience amid tragedy. A GoFundMe campaign launched for him raised over $276,000, a testament to the community's determination to support him through unimaginable loss. Despite the community's efforts to heal, lingering questions cast a shadow over their grief. The park, once a place of peace and adventure, now served as a stark reminder of how quickly darkness can descend, leaving lives forever changed. The conclusion of the investigation, that 23-year-old Anthony Sherwin, with no criminal record, had murdered the Schmidt family before taking his own life, did little to ease the unease surrounding the case. While the narrative appeared straightforward, glaring gaps left many questioning its validity. The Sherwin family's claims of Anthony's innocence and the lack of definitive forensic evidence cast doubt on the investigation's findings. One key point of contention was the ghost gun found near Anthony's body. Assembled from untraceable parts, the weapon raised questions about its origin. Cecilia and Joe Sherwin admitted their son had built it as a hobby but insisted it was for self-defense during camping trips. They denied any violent intent. Adding to their skepticism, Cecilia noted discrepancies in the attacker's description: dressed in black, and Anthony's clothing that night, green shorts and a t-shirt. Investigators dismissed these claims, maintaining that the evidence pointed to Anthony as the perpetrator. The absence of motive was perhaps the most troubling aspect. Anthony had no known connection to the Schmidt family, and his behavior in the days leading up to the murders was unremarkable. Described as quiet and intelligent, he displayed no signs of aggression or instability. This left even experienced investigators questioning whether this was random violence or if deeper hidden motives existed. The discovery of Anthony's body further complicated the narrative. Found deep in the woods hours after the murders, its location raised questions about his movements. How had he evaded detection? Was his death consistent with suicide, or could another party have been involved? Law enforcement's refusal to release key details, such as ballistic test results or a clear timeline, only fueled speculation. Cedar Falls, a town known for its sense of safety and community, was left grappling with the tragedy. For many, the deaths of Tyler, Sarah, and Lula Schmidt felt personal, shaking the town to its core. While some accepted the official account, others believed vital pieces of the puzzle had been overlooked. For Arlo, the young survivor, the burden of that horrific night remains. The unanswered questions surrounding his family's murder cast a shadow over what should have been a place of peace and safety. As the town sought closure, doubts and unresolved mysteries ensured the case would haunt Cedar Falls for years to come: the forensics and the missing links. The forensic investigation into the Schmidt family murders became both crucial and controversial. Law enforcement asserted that the ghost gun found near Anthony Sherwin's body was the weapon used in the crime. However, they provided little explanation of how this conclusion was reached. Ghost guns, untraceable due to the lack of serial numbers, posed significant challenges for the investigation, leaving questions about their connection to the murders. Inside the Schmidt family's tent, forensic experts uncovered signs of a violent struggle. Blood patterns near Tyler and Sarah indicated they had fought back. Tyler's wounds suggested a brutal and personal assault, while Sarah appeared to have been swiftly silenced. Lula's injuries, a gunshot wound and signs of strangulation, were disturbingly cruel, painting a chilling picture of the violence that unfolded. Yet critical gaps in the evidence raised doubts. Ballistics tests were reportedly conducted on the ghost gun, but no public reports confirmed a match between the bullets recovered from the victims and the weapon. Additionally, no DNA evidence linked Sherwin to the Schmidt family or the tent. His fingerprints were not publicly confirmed to be on the weapon, and no physical traces or footprints connected him to the scene of the attack. Cecilia Sherwin questioned the plausibility of her son committing such a crime and escaping unnoticed. She argued that Anthony, inexperienced with violence, could not have carried out such a savage attack without leaving a clear trail. His body, discovered deep in the woods hours after the murders, only deepened her doubts. She suspected foul play, questioning how he ended up there and why the timeline of events remained murky. The absence of a clear motive compounded the mystery. Sherwin had no known connection to the Schmidt family, and there was no suicide note explaining his actions. Independent forensic experts pointed out these inconsistencies, noting that circumstantial evidence alone could not provide a definitive conclusion. DNA, fingerprints, or confession are critical, one expert remarked. Here, those elements are missing. The Sherwin family took their doubts public, requesting independent verification of the evidence. They argued that law enforcement had closed the case too quickly under public pressure. Despite some media attention, their calls for a review were dismissed, leaving their concerns unresolved. For the Cedar Falls community, these ambiguities fueled unease. Many wanted to believe justice had been served, but unanswered questions cast doubt on the investigation. Was Anthony Sherwin truly the cold-blooded killer described by authorities, or had vital clues been overlooked? The case was officially closed, but the lingering mysteries ensured the Schmidt family murders would remain an enigma. For those closest to the tragedy, the search for answers was far from over. The closure of the investigation in late 2022 offered little comfort to the grieving community of Cedar Falls. The loss of Tyler, Sarah, and Lula Schmidt left a wound that refused to heal. Their vibrant presence, once a cornerstone of the town, became a memory immortalized in tributes, vigils, and heartfelt gestures of remembrance. The Cedar Falls Public Library, where Sarah had worked, became a focal point for mourning, A corner adorned with family photos and notes from neighbors, colleagues, and strangers served as a collective expression of grief. Tyler's workplace honored him with a statement highlighting his dedication, mentorship, and kindness, which extended beyond professional boundaries. Their deaths struck a deeply personal chord with everyone who had known them. For 9-year-old Arlo, life was forever changed. Taken in by Sarah's brother, he began the difficult journey of rebuilding amid the profound absence of his parents and sister. A GoFundMe campaign raised over $276,000 to secure his future, a testament to the community's love and determination to support him in the face of unimaginable tragedy. Yet, as Cedar Falls rallied around Arlo, lingering ambiguities in the case fueled debates. The Sherwin family, convinced of Anthony's innocence, sought transparency, demanding access to sealed investigative reports and forensic evidence. Their requests were denied, deepening their frustration. Cecilia Sherwin, Anthony's mother, became a vocal advocate for answers, questioning the investigation's timeline, lack of motive, and absence of definitive evidence. Anthony wasn't perfect, she said, but he wasn't a monster. National conversations emerged around the weapon allegedly used in the crime, a ghost gun, assembled without traceable serial numbers. Advocates for stricter gun control cited the case as a warning about the dangers of unregulated firearms, while critics argued that more preventive measures were essential to avoid such tragedies. The debate added a complex layer to an already perplexing case. The site of the tragedy, Maquoketa Caves State Park, carried its own legacy. Once celebrated for its natural beauty and family-friendly appeal, it became a chilling reminder of violence's reach. Visitor numbers dropped sharply as concerns over safety grew. Although the park eventually reopened with heightened security, its serene trails and shadowy caves seemed to echo the haunting memory of the murders. For the residents of Cedar Falls, life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the shadow of the tragedy remained. To many, the case underscored the fragility of safety, a grim reminder that evil can strike in the most unexpected places. Others saw it as a call for justice, not only for the Schmidts but also for Anthony Sherwin, whose role in the crime left lingering questions. The Schmidt family's legacy continues through the community's efforts to honor their memory and support Arlo. Yet, the unanswered questions surrounding their deaths ensure their story remains a haunting chapter in Cedar Falls history, a stark reminder of how suddenly darkness can descend, leaving grief and mystery in its wake. The murders of Tyler, Sarah, and Lula Schmidt remain a haunting chapter in the memory of Cedar Falls, leaving behind a profound void in the lives they touched. Once a family united by love and a passion for adventure, their lives were cruelly taken in an act of violence that continues to baffle investigators, with no clear motive or answers. For 9-year-old Arlo, the sole survivor, life has become a testament to resilience. Supported by a compassionate community, he is a beacon of hope amid profound loss, embodying the strength to endure and rebuild. The outpouring of support, both emotional and financial, reflects the humanity that persists even in the darkest times. However, unresolved questions cloud the official narrative. The absence of motive, the Sherwin family's challenges to the findings, and gaps in forensic evidence fuel ongoing speculation. Was this truly an unprovoked act, or do hidden truths remain? The Schmidts' story is one of devastating loss but also enduring love. Their impact resonates in the tributes and support they inspired, reminding all of the importance of cherishing family and community. Yet, their tragedy is a sobering reminder of life's fragility, urging a collective pursuit of justice and answers. As Cedar Falls moves forward, the Schmidts' legacy endures, a symbol of both love and the need for truth. Haunted by unanswered questions and chilling mysteries, subscribe now to uncover the truth with us.